Hop on board the management train. First stop, Motivation Station. All aboard!
Welcome to Managing Humans. I'm your host, Chad Bates. This week, we are taking a break from former Amazon employees and turning to the hospitality industry. I met this week's guest in the year 2000 when I was working in Toronto, Canada, and she was a bartender at the Hard Rock Cafe. She had all the skills of a great bartender. She could make a strong drink and was a delightful conversationalist. Over the years, she's moved through the Toronto restaurant scene and is now working to help folks in the hospitality industry do better, helping stores and restaurants improve service and take better care of their employees. As you'll hear, she's thought a lot about the topic of managing humans, and her experience is going to be really valuable to anybody in the hospitality industry or any manager who wants to be there for their teams. As always, if you like the show, give it a like, subscribe, and comment on your podcast app of choice, YouTube, or at our Substack. Now let's get to my conversation with Cher. Welcome to Managing Humans, Cher Dueck.
Hi, how's it going?
Our first Canadian guest.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Yeah, everybody's been a first of something, so it's when you're still early in the pod, you get a lot of firsts.
Yeah.
But
I get the first Canadian, first hospitality based, possibly.
Very, yes, first female guest, so you get to check off a lot of boxes. We'll send you a plaque.
There we go. Thank you. Yes, I'll hang it proudly.
So I always enjoy sharing how I know all the guests so far, and I love our story of getting to meeting.
I love our story.
It's unique.
Solid 24 years ago, I would say. 23, 24 years ago, yeah.
I walked into the Hard Rock Cafe in Toronto, Canada, a young man, and you were kind and delightful, very friendly. Everyone said that everybody in Canada was like that, and I just, kind of expected it. But I think you were one of the first people that I actually had a conversation with in Canada. And it was like, oh my God, if everybody's like this is going to be an amazing, what was I there, 2 months or something? And then kept coming back, and you kept getting better and more interesting jobs in hospitality. But you were always, every time I'd come back to Toronto, you'd have a cooler job, running more stuff and managing more people. So when I started this, I was like, I really want to talk to Cher and see what she thinks about the differences between managing people in hospitality and what I've done for almost forever is software. So that's where
corporate world. I think there are a lot of there will be a lot of similarities, but I think there's some great benefits to coming with a hospitality background if you're moving into the corporate world as well. So we do have a pretty great story. I think I maybe even still remember what you drank back then. Was it dark rum and Diet Coke? Is that right?
That's a good question. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it was dark rum and Diet Coke, because at that point in time we were both children.
Yeah.
And I think
oh, you know what
I
it was?
didn't really understand.
It was spiced rum and Diet Coke. It was Captain Morgan's.
Spiced rum.
Yeah.
Spiced rum and Diet Coke. Yeah. I remember it being like something I didn't really drink, and I was like, ooh, this is. Back then, I was so interested by somebody having
Americans
something
doing
besides
down there.
Beer, or it was great. Yeah, so it's been a minute.
Just a couple.
Just a couple, and I think for me, my career spans. What year are we in now? 2024. So we're pushing up on over 30 years working in hospitality. I think 33 years right now.
Yeah,
working in the industry. So I've pivoted a bit, but
yeah. Let's talk about what you're doing now, and then we'll go back and get early. So
which I think does cross over. So I continue and for the last 10 years have consulted in the hospitality industry, primarily in brand development and human resource development, so corporate culture development within the hospitality industry. Because I'm passionate about it, and the system with hospitality, primarily food and beverage and retail is my main experience, is fairly broken. As I think the corporate culture in a lot of different industries is. But I've pivoted in the last handful of years into animal behavior and primarily dog care and dog behavioral studies, which interestingly enough really does connect quite a bit, because we talk about human behavior a lot when we're leading and managing people. And we're animals and dogs are animals, and the act of observing when you're a leader is so key. And the act of observing when you're working with animals is also so key. And, you know, the reason that that behavior is human behavior is our strongest form of communication really shines through when it comes to animal behavior as well. Because I think when we need to interact with people, we need to communicate. If we watch their body language and if we listen to their tone, and we take away everything else, so much is being communicated that way. And it helps us to be able to guide and lead and direct things in a way that's just really, really deep and I think and successful. Yeah, I think I love what I do now, but it also has helped me in the way I work with my clients, and how I work with my hospitality clients, not necessarily their employees, but how they as entrepreneurs attach themselves to their business. And then what that looks like for them as leaders, and whether or not they need to step back as leaders and bring other people in who can observe in a different way. And that's one of the things I had as my closing notes, was that entrepreneurship does not mean leadership, and those two rarely go hand in hand. You can be a strong one and you can be a strong the other. Rarely do you have somebody who's strong at both, because the dreamers tend to not excel at leading humans. So, and managing humans. So,
so many topics in there that
so
they could probably be their own. They could probably be their own shows. So
yes, I know. I'm like, and that's for a podcast for another time.
That's right.
Psychology of human and animal behavior.
We've related managing people to parenting in previous podcasts. So the relationship to animal behavior is a natural one, I guess. So
absolutely.
We can explore that.
I don't have children, but I will always be grateful to my mother, who, when I got my first dog, said to me, it really is like raising a kid. And I was like, okay, I'm not completely crazy here.
Yeah.
Now, I do not think my dog is a human being,
right.
By any means, but the behavioral similarities between children and the animal world, it's, there's more similarities than there are differences in a lot of ways. So yeah.
I'm glad someone with children said that, because when I say that as a middle-aged man with no children, I sound like a crank. So
I know.
Your mother saying it makes me feel better.
I've had more parents make that equation to me, and I'm like, okay, thank you. I generally will not say it out loud, because I'm just like, it does make me sound a little bit like a crazy cat lady. So yeah.
So let's go back. Let's talk about your very first job. Where's the
Sure.
first thing you did that you got paid for, but wasn't something your parents gave you allowance for?
Yeah. Well, growing up, my parents were both really into dining. We were taught at a very young age how to act in a restaurant. They were friends with owners of a fine dining steakhouse that wasn't very far from our house. So that was, I don't know how often we went, but it was regular enough that we went as a family, and we learned to order. My dad taught us how to calculate tips at a very young age. I think that percentage was the first thing I learned at a very, very young age. He would hand us the bill and tell us how much money he needed to leave, and tell us to figure out how much money he needed to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where I got my first job. So in that steakhouse, they also had two big banquet halls in the basement. And I had always said to them, I'm coming to work for you. I'm coming to work for you. And literally as soon as I was old enough, which at the time was 13, I went to start working there within a week of my birthday. So that was my first job. Yeah, I was chomping at the bit to have a job, be able to experience what it was like to work in food and beverage. I thought it just seemed so fast paced and exciting, and so I went to do that. Yeah, it was a lot. I'm sure. I mean, my memories of those very first days are dim at best, and I'm sure that the other staff hated working with me at first, because I have no doubt that I was a hyperactive, overeager young teenager who just wanted to learn everything and probably couldn't carry a tray and was pretty dropsy. But it was my first job, so yeah. So
the hospitality started early.
It started early. I think it was in my dad had run bars and restaurants. It was not his career, but my dad had run bars and restaurants in his 20s. He was a composites engineer. So by the time I came around, there was none of that left in his life, but he was still pretty passionate about the industry. And my first cousin, who's kind of like a brother to me, is also a chef in Toronto. So we worked together for a number of years as well, and the industry has kind of been in my family for quite a long time. So it was a natural thing for me. Not always what I wanted to do, but it is where I ended up staying. So, nice.
So how did you get into management? Or was the first time that somebody put you in charge?
So a few years into that banquet hall role, so I was maybe 16. I'm not even sure if I was 16. They made me the supervisor of the events in the banquet halls, which meant that on the weekends when I wasn't in school, I was coming in really early in the mornings and getting the banquet halls set up and working with the clients to ensure everything was ready for their events, which I'm sure was shocking for them to walk into a teenager helping them with all of this. And it was primarily brides and grooms as well. And then I was also supervising the team, which was significantly older than me. So I was definitely the youngest member and the leader of the team. So that had its own challenges. I have no doubt that I was probably an egotistical, can I swear? Sure. An egotistical little shit. I probably was. But I'm the one who cut the sections and made sure everyone had their assigned jobs and everything. And yeah, it was a young age to have that put upon me, but the owners trusted me. I was ferociously responsible to a fault. I didn't have a lot of fun in my teenage years. I just really wanted to do a good job and be a good job and do all that. I don't know that the leadership thing was something that I was prepared for or wanted to do. It just was, I was in the job, and it's kind of, I don't even know that it was asked of me. I think it was told that was now what I needed to do. So,
right.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing you didn't feel ready for that role of managing people.
No, there's no way I was ready. There's a chance at that age that I thought I was ready. Right. But in hindsight, I was definitely not. But I guess they saw something in me that I didn't. So
yeah. Did you get any kind of training, or somebody gave you gave you some keys, or told you to make the schedule and sent you on your way?
Yeah. I'm not. You know what? I'm not sure that maybe I made the schedule. I eventually, by the time I left there, which is when I was 18, I was definitely doing all of that. I'm not sure initially if I was, but yeah, I was doing everything else for sure.
Did you, by the time you were 18 and left, did you feel like you had more of an actual management role, or was it still just kind of supervisor of a certain crew, or was it limited in what you were doing?
I definitely had more of a management role. By the time I left, though, I also had two other jobs that I was working. So that when I worked, I worked a lot. So by the time my birthday's at the end of the year, so I graduated at a young age from school, and instead of going straight into post-secondary, I went to work. So I managed a calendar kiosk at the local mall. So I was also the manager there, and I worked at a homemade candy and fudge shop.
Ooh.
So that was disastrous for my health, but no, as somebody who doesn't get sick of food, I consumed a lot of very sweet, tasty things. But and I wasn't managing that, but I was managing the banquet halls collaboratively. I mean, they had two brothers that owned it, and they each had children, groups of children around my age. So it was a very collaborative environment in a lot of ways. I have to say that they were great to learn from. There was a sense of humor there. There was a culture that sometimes was a bit harsh, but for the most part was actually really a fun environment to work in, considering some of my jobs since then. So, yeah.
So let's go through the progression here. You had all these different jobs, and they were, fairly hospitality, other than the calendar store, I guess, or the calendar kiosk. Were
other than the calendar store.
Did you kind of focus into hospitality and?
Well, my initial goal when I moved, so I'm from a town about an hour outside of Toronto. So when I moved to Toronto in '99, my original goal was to be a director of film and theater. I was looking at being a casting director, but I also really was interested in stage direction. And so I moved to Toronto primarily for that, and then don't think I realized the ego in that industry until I moved and kind of got familiar with what it was like in a far more cutthroat place, and very quickly went, "Oh, this isn't for me." Then I continued working in restaurants, and pretty much every restaurant that I worked in, without applying for management roles, would continue to get asked to move into supervisory and leadership roles. So I eventually went to college in Toronto for hospitality management, in which I was thinking about this, reflecting on this when I was looking at your teachers last night. My teacher actually asked if I would open a restaurant with him. And I was 22 at the time, I think, 23. And he really thought that I was excelling and wanted to partner in a restaurant. Thankfully, at that time, I had the wherewithal to know that wasn't what that I wasn't prepared to take that on. Right. But I did learn a lot from him, and a lot from the class as to the business end of working in the hospitality industry, and where a lot of the stress comes from for business owners. Because even by that point, I'd had some really positive and really negative experiences all around from working in the industry. So yeah,
and that's an interesting kind of junction where a lot of people don't have something that's so natural, like you can go to school for the thing you're doing, like hospitality management, and there's university courses, there's programs that offer the different types of things that you can learn about, how to run a restaurant, how to run a bar, how to run a hotel. And in your experience, did any of that include like how to manage different kinds of people, or was it very much like, here's how to do the bookkeeping, here's how to order the liquor?
Yeah, I think it covered a certain degree of human resources in the sense of how to pay people and how to follow labor laws. But, the food and beverage industry primarily was built on the truly the history of slavery and the French brigade system, the French military brigade system. So it was a very unhealthy birthing of an industry. And so it really was your leaders down, or sorry, I will not say your leaders, your management, your chefs down. And if you were a server, a host, a dishwasher, a bartender, a line cook, you were the scum, like that wasn't recognized that you were the backbone and what made the operation work. It was really all about what was perceived and what was consumed and what was seen at the front, and everyone else was just just minions to serve the restaurant owner and the chef. So and still to this day, it's a massive ship that's only slowly turning, and I'm happy to be affiliated with a number of people who are at the helm of turning that ship. But it's what really should be happening is it should be sunk and built entirely, and maybe not even be a ship. But it's an industry that has been built on addiction and abuse, and so it's been interesting the way we teach for it. I did one thing that I don't think you and I have ever talked about is I did teach at the same college years later in human resources in events. They had me teach a part-time course, and when they gave me the curriculum, they had the teacher that they had for the class had unexpectedly dropped out, so it was quite last minute. I think I had about a month to prepare, and they gave me this curriculum, and it was so outdated and painful to read. I just went, can I teach what's happening now in the industry? Now, this was events focused. I did eventually get into event production and catering and food and beverage on that end. But it was really interesting to read the antiquated documents that they were still teaching that just weren't relevant at all. So we revamped the course load a little bit and the curriculum a little bit, which was as much as I could. But really interesting to see what was still being celebrated in the industry of like burning yourself out and overworking. And, I still to this day remember the first time I worked a 24-hour day in events and all of us celebrating it, all of us being like, yay, and like how unhealthy and terrible it is that anyone would celebrate being on their feet and running around for 24 hours. Like that's just not, unless you're in some sort of endurance competition, for charity, that nobody should be doing that. So, so it's nice to see that the industry is changing. But it taught me a lot about leadership and what, having started in many different roles in food and beverage, and retail, as well. It really helped me learn how to observe and ask the right questions, and took coaching in a lot of years to understand that what I needed and what I wanted as an employee isn't necessarily what everybody else wants, and so to ask the right questions of our team as well. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, it definitely seemed, I think the pandemic and then, ironically, the bear is like opened up to a lot of people like how bad a kitchen is and can be. And
did we talk about this before? Did we talk about the bear?
I think we chatted about it a little bit.
Okay.
And I think you had the same feelings. I believe that a couple of other people that I know that have worked in restaurants for a long time is they can't watch it because it's too close to reality. It's
so close to reality, and like the fact that they call it a comedy and don't put up trigger warnings is shocking. It's a friend of mine runs a organization in Toronto, in Canada, North America, actually. I guess they're growing quickly around mental health in the hospitality industry, and the helping to get the support and change in the culture that is needed. Recently, because I guess the newest season just came out.
Just dropped.
She's been addressing it a lot, and I watched. I don't even know if I got through all of season one. And I get asked about it a lot, especially when I meet people who don't work in the industry and find out that I have. You get asked about a lot of, I used to get asked about the reality chef shows a lot, which I've never watched. I don't want to say never ever, but I don't watch reality cooking TV because that's as far from reality as you can get. Whereas something like The Bear is shockingly traumatically real. And one of the things that she had mentioned about this most recent season is how much they are revealing about the industry, but then they also are celebrate some of the cameo chefs that are on. Are some of the worst offenders in the industry as well. And the fact that they seem to be holding them up and celebrating them in this show, it's a strange, tricky thing. 'Cause it's almost like, are you holding them up to show how awful they are? I haven't seen it, so I don't know if they're lauded in the show or if they are, the demons that they are in the show. But truly, some of the chefs that are in and I'm not going to name names, but some of the chefs that are in season 3 are some of the worst when it comes to using the brigade system and treating their staff poorly.
Yeah.
So
I can't imagine they would be on the show to show off how poorly they treat their employees.
I can't imagine. Listen, that's a whole podcast for another time, and I'd have to go and watch that series, which I just am not interested in taking it up again. So
sometimes there are those things in pop culture where it's like, oh, this is funny, until you actually know the true backstory, and then it's like, oh, this is horrific.
Yeah. I mean, people are laughing at it because they don't realize how real it is, right? If people haven't experienced it, I think that's where the comedy comes from. They're like, can you imagine if that really happened? And we're all industry folks over here being like, no, help us, please.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, onto lighter topics.
Yes, please.
So, what, as a manager, as a consultant, as a customer, as a human being out there, what do you want to see managers do better?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I think I've alluded to it a little bit, but listen to your team. Listen, observe, stand back, and observe behavior, observe what's being said around you, not just to you, and really think about it. If your staff aren't coming to you for help, question why they're not trusting you and why they're not coming to you for help. You are there to be of service to your team. That is the primary role of any leader. If your title includes manager, or leader of, it's assumptive then that you have a team under you, not under, but that you have a team that you are meant to lead. And the primary objective of that role is to help them find success. And the most successful staff are the ones that feel taken care of and trusted and like they can trust their leaders. So I want to think, I'm going to look at my notes real quick. So observing the unspoken needs. So if somebody, if you're overhearing someone stressed about childcare, if you're seeing that someone's uncomfortable sitting at a desk all day long, if you're hearing someone stressed about their upcoming vacation because they haven't caught up on work, what can you do to help those things? Is there flexibility within the role to change their working hours so that they can pick up and drop off their kids in a time that works? Or can they have a hybrid role? What is the flexibility with that? If somebody's in pain, can you pivot them to a standing desk? Can you get them a new chair? And can you do all of those? Can you do those things? Can you assign a team member to collaborate with the person who's going on vacation so that their workload isn't so stressful when they're leaving and then when they're returning? Can you do all of those things without waiting to be asked? And I think those are some of the key things for leading your team, is not just being there in support of the tasks that they're being asked to do, but also in their wellness. So also, if you're brought on as a leader to a company where you may not know the tasks directly, you may not have fulfilled on those tasks, learn them. There can't be anything more beneficial to your team member if you are tasked with hiring for particular roles, and you might be a very skilled leader, and that's your niche, and that's great. That's what you're going to do. Your ability to understand what their day-to-day looks like is key to your success as a leader and key to their success as an employee. So I think understanding, I've worked in lots of restaurants, lots of bars, nightclubs, events, all of those things. The only thing that I haven't done fully and completely is work in a kitchen, like preparing food for others, because that is a whole skill set that you have to learn. That is just not, but I have worked in a dish pit. I haven't been a dishwasher, but when your dishwasher doesn't show up, you learn pretty quickly how to make that happen. So all of those things, when I ran events departments for people, I was coming in very seasoned and senior at that point in time. So I was given an entire department and some very junior staff who were needing to execute these events or sell these events and had zero experience. And being able to sit with them and understand what the program looked like and what the needs were, helped me learn with them how to create a culture within our department that really excelled, rather than just sit back and go, you have to do this. Here are your tasks. Here are your targets. I expect you to meet them, without having a doors open policy of come ask me if you don't know how to do it, because I may not know, and we're going to find the right person who does. So I think facilitating the do you have Coles Notes in the States? No, Cliff Notes. You call them Cliff Notes in the
Cliff
States.
Notes, yeah.
The Cliff Notes of what I just said was, foster safety and security for your team and trust. Show them that you can be vulnerable as well. So I think being a strong leader also is being human, and you're going to reap rewards from your team.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And it's hard to derive a trend from 3 interviews, but all 3 interviews that I've done so far, like this has the basic answer of this question is listen. And
listen. Yeah.
Don't wait for people to come talk to you. Like, go actively listen. Yesterday I talked to a former coworker, and his was go find the introverts and make sure that they tell you what they think. Because if you're not actively getting that feedback, then you're missing out on information that's super helpful. And maybe from somebody who's more thoughtful, but it's the hardest to do. It's like you got to get out of your office, get out of your chair, make that connection.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I was very introverted as a kid. I was a kid who was like, I just walked past the kids' camp yesterday, and they were all playing, and there was one little girl on a bench just sitting by herself watching, and I'm like, oh, I know who you are, because that was exactly me. I wasn't out there participating with the other kids. I didn't feel included. And now we live in a time where we're gradually understanding that there is neurodivergent people with varying degrees of neurodivergency and neurotypical. And oftentimes we've just looked at neurotypical people and taken that as, well, this is how we have to move forward. But the more we observe people, with neurodivergences, it's really, we learn so much. And asking the right questions, you're right, of introverts or people who come with different abilities, or just asking the question of what do you need? How can I help? And then truly, you're right, observing and listening, and taking that in and then doing something about it. That's the key thing, is like once you're given an action item from your team member, you may not be able to say 100% yes to what they're asking for. You might not. Like your hands might be tied by your bosses, by your budget, by many different things. Get creative. Like, creative leadership isn't just like following the policies and procedures by the book. Get creative. Everything's dynamic in a corporate environment, and it should be dynamic. It's meant to grow, So yeah. Listen and observe.
If it was easy to prescribe all this stuff, they wouldn't need us. They could just replace us with a book.
Exactly. Yeah.
So this is probably someplace that, especially in hospitality, there seems to be a lot more turnover and movement in people. So you probably do a lot more hiring than some other managerial roles.
Yeah.
So the typical question we ask is, tell us about a time you made a great hire, and what was the question you asked? How did you know that was was going to be a good answer, and how did you see that person come in the future?
Yeah.
But also, let's expand on a little bit. In hospitality, when you are hiring a lot more, and you have seasonality and things like that, how do you handle hiring so that you can make a great hire?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. Well, I mean, the food and beverage industry itself is one of the most diverse industries when it comes to career goals, when it comes to availability, when it comes to culture, when it comes to age. You have people who range from so many different areas just under those specific categories, and I could go on and on. So you really have to drill down to personality and passions, and you have to do that relatively quickly. In Toronto, we have 4 seasons, so patios are only open for a certain amount of the year. So there's patio hiring times. There's Christmas, busy holiday season hiring times where people know that they're coming in for a fixed period of time to work. You also have students who are finishing high school, finishing college, don't necessarily have a full-time job at that point. So they're looking for something to make them a quote unquote quick buck while they are, finding their path and their future goals. You have people like me who have, made it their career. You have a lot of, let's say, transient industries, artists and actors and things like that who have gigs that run for a few months at a time. They need to have another job to come back to. So, performers who maybe will do a show run for 3 or 4 months, but the other, 8 months of the year, they want to work full time in a restaurant, or need to have something stable. So you definitely have that. And then, and then you have people of varying age groups as well. The list goes on and on. So one of the things that I find when I'm hiring, so I have had a couple of roles when I've worked in restaurants directly. I generally have been responsible for hiring everyone in what falls under the front of house category. So your bartenders, your hosts, your servers, anyone, your managers, anyone who's providing direct service to the guests, whereas the back of house is the kitchen's responsibility. However, there have been many roles, and oftentimes when I'm working for an organization, I'm vetting resumes for all areas of the restaurant and then setting up interviews for chefs or kitchen managers to hire the back of house staff. So I'll have preliminary phone calls with a lot of different people. So I think one of the key questions that I ask on a regular basis, first of all, people come in really nervous, right? Especially if you're hiring somebody or if you're interviewing somebody who's never worked in the industry before. So a lot of times that summer staff that's coming in have very little restaurant experience, or they're, looking to get a job in a kitchen and they're fresh out of chef school, but they don't have any experience. They're super nervous. So from an interview process, setting people at ease right out of the gate can make your interview a lot more efficient and a lot just more comfortable for everyone, right? If you only have, let's say, 30 minutes to interview someone, you don't want that to be bumbling around with a lot of different, I don't know, stress questions. So sending them questions in advance can often be helpful. They can prepare for that. That can backfire too, because they can have somebody else prepare it for them. And then
right.
You have to really use your gut to understand what's going on. I find that making myself vulnerable and letting them know that I'm a human being at the beginning really helps. So whether I say, oh my gosh, I tripped this morning and fell flat on my face, sorry, I've got this scrape here, or whatever, or saying, preempting any nervousness by talking about something goofy that I did or have done, or or if noticing something on their resume that we have in common, and sharing that will be a really great icebreaker in a short period of time. And it helps to gain their trust as well to be able to share something like that. One of the key things for the restaurant industry that I ask that I do think is relevant for many industries is asking, what does the term service mean to you? I remember being asked that for the first time, I don't know, in the mid 2000s. And I remember it stopping me because nobody had asked me that question before, but I had always, I had, in any interview that I'd ever given, I'd always responded with my thoughts on that, but nobody had ever asked me that question. And it got me really excited, and it became the thing that I ask absolutely in every single interview all the time. Because I think if people really understand the question, and I have a follow-up to it in case they don't, they're going to tell me about the experience that they're creating. I think a great one-word answer to that is experience. What does the term service mean to you? Experience. And providing an experience and creating an environment of experience, creating something that wasn't there before, right?
Yeah.
Which is great. I often get the response of, oh, bringing someone food, taking an order, making sure somebody's got water on time. And I'm like, okay, yes, that's the function of service in a lot of ways. But to me, I like to be broad about it. So one of my follow-up questions that makes me very happy, and I've had some awesome hires out of this, is to ask a candidate about a time when they were receiving customer service. So it doesn't have to be in the food industry. If they were going into a shoe store to buy shoes or clothes, or they were in a restaurant or a hotel or any place you go and receive service, which is just about everywhere that when we leave the house, we're generally receiving some sort of service from somebody else.
Sure.
Even when it's not transactional, there can be service without transaction. And that's also a podcast for another time. But, so asking them about a time when they were a guest and received really a transformational customer experience. So whether or not it was positive or negative, I never bring that out. I just say a time where you walked into a place and you changed your mind about that place by the time you left based on the service you experienced. Oftentimes, if I just get somebody who's like bitching and moaning about I had this really bad experience at, Burger King the other day, and like there was a hair in my food or something, they're not getting it. They're not necessarily understanding. And that to me is automatically going to tell me that they aren't eager to provide service for other people, which again, depending on the role, may or may not be key, but understanding how something was rectified in those situations also can help. I interviewed a staff member about 10 years ago that I was very reluctant to interview. I will fully admit it. We're friends now. I was very reluctant to interview her. She had sent her resume in Word format. It was all screwed up when I got it. I was like, just not having it.
Yeah.
And my boss said, no, please, I really want you to interview her. And she answered that question with one of the best answers ever, and totally talked about a time where she had gone to a hotel as a trial run for a conference she was doing, and the experience that they created for her, but how they went above and beyond in so many little ways that I knew she got it. I knew she understood, and she ended up being our top salesperson. She only stayed for about a year and left, and now is like just her career's taken off. She's doing so well. So I'm glad that I was forced to interview her. I also will always think she's the first person I think about. I've had tons of great responses to that question, but she's the first person I think about when I think of asking that in an interview, because it really was like, yep, I hired her on the spot after that. She finished answering that question. I said, when can you start? Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, I don't know about everybody else, but I am stealing that to put in my next set of interviews when I have to hire again. I may have to tweak it a little bit, but maybe what is support or something like that. But I love a simple question that has has to have a very thoughtful answer. because
Yes.
it tells you
Yeah.
how the candidate thinks, or if they think, I think is probably more apt.
Absolutely. Well, and when you have somebody who rushes to answer that question as well, like sometimes somebody rushes to answer it because they're excited about the question, but then you'll have people who are in that interview and they're just ticking boxes, right? We've all interviewed people where you know that they're just ticking boxes through, okay, you're going to ask me about this. You're going to ask me about my challenges. You're going to ask me what I need to learn. Like they just kind of have this mental, wheel that you're going through in your head. And so when you ask a thoughtful question, sometimes you get this regurgitated answer purely because that's the mindset they're in. And if you can pause, and I love the pregnant pause. Oh, in interviews, the pregnant pause is so valuable, is to just, especially if you've like broken the ice and you've made them feel comfortable, if they give you an answer that's so canned and you stop and you smile and you say, hey, I'm going to ask you that question again, and I want you to take a bit of time to really think about how you answer it. You're going to let them know that you're being thoughtful as well about who they are, and especially if we often also know really out of the gate if somebody has potential or not, right? So for the role that we're interviewing for, so I think giving the opportunity to perform better is really, really important as well. I freeze up on written tests. If somebody told me that to get a job, I'd have to do a written test, I'd just be like, nope, job's not for me, because I can't. I'm in my 40s and I absolutely freeze up when it comes to having to regurgitate information. So that's one thing I know about myself. So if somebody gave me the opportunity to say, can we do this verbally? Can we do this in a podcast forum, or something like that, it's easier for me to excel in those areas.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, this is my chance to announce your future class on how to interview. Because I'm gonna make that a function of the site someday here. So
I'll absolutely do that. I love interviewing people.
Yeah, and I think it's
as much as I love doing laundry.
It's. I think interviewing people is like public speaking. It's like people are so freaked out by it. And I think that if you can be just comfortable with it, you're going to be amazing. And that if you really are thoughtful about it and careful and know what you're doing, then you can be world changing with how well you do it. So
I agree.
We're gonna come back to that one at some point.
Keeping the human and managing humans.
Yeah,
there we
exactly.
go. That's what we'll title it: Keeping the Human and Managing Humans.
I like it. So, tell us about a time you had to help an employee move on to a new opportunity.
All right. So again, I'm going to be very broad with this and not specific. Because it's hard.
Like being specific with the positive and in general with the negative.
I read that question as when an employee is maybe not working out in the role and we need to move them along. So, and I've definitely, I think my batting average is pretty great on hiring. However, I've definitely made some hires where it's like, oh, that was not the right person for the role.
Yeah.
The first thing that I would always do is see if there's a role within the company that might be better suited for that person. Try some redirection. I was talking about neurodivergency. Sometimes there's just, you've asked for somebody to complete a task in a way that doesn't make sense to them. So ensure that they really understand their role and what's needed to fulfill it. So I think provided all those steps have been taken and you're finally at this point where you're like, this is not, maybe you're not gelling with them, the clients aren't gelling with them, their colleagues aren't gelling, like something's happening that is making it a requirement to move on. The first thing you go back to is that you hired that person for a reason. So there were values and skills when you initially hired that person that made you bring them on board. So, and if you weren't the hiring manager, but you are the one who's moving them along, the first thing that you should do is see if you can have a conversation with the person who did bring them on the team. Ask them why. Ask them what that experience was like, so that when you are approaching this employee. And when you are having to have that potentially really tough discussion, it could be a very like relief discussion as well. They might know, but don't know how to walk away from it as well. That you're prepared to support them and encourage them for whatever the future may bring. It shouldn't just be like you suck, you're fired, off you go, here's your package, because that's gonna burn a bridge personally. It's gonna burn a bridge professionally, and they're going to likely leave a bad review on Glassdoor or something like that with the company, right? Like there's just so many downfalls to treating someone poorly when they're exiting the company, and there are so many upsides to assisting them. So if you can find their value and skills, if you can find an opportunity, like if they're leaving on their own terms, but you know they're leaving because the job's not working, if you can find time to have a coaching session with them about what they maybe want to do, about where you see their strengths and their weaknesses, so that they leave feeling informed and supportive, that's just doing nothing but great things, like they're going to remember you. If somebody else is getting interviewed by you or potentially hired by you in the future and they know them, they're going to talk about how great you are, and they will trust your values. So if you are exiting someone who trusts you and feels safe with you, then there really can't be a loss. Yes, it's their ego is going to be bruised. I've lost jobs before, and it absolutely sucks. But there is the right way to do it. For sure, there's many right ways to do it, and there's many wrong ways to do it. So I think that the key thing is ensuring that when they leave, they still feel like they can trust you and feel safe in their final hours, final days with the company, whatever that looks like, and offering your support to them as they move on, to the extent that you're able to. Obviously, you need to setting firm boundaries with your staff as well, so that you don't necessarily want to hand them out all your personal information so that they're like, hey, can you help me with this? Hey, can you help me with that? Because I have had that happen as well, is also key. But continuing to maintain the culture that you fostered with your team, even after they've moved on, is really important. I've rehired in different, like when I've left, I've brought many staff, not stolen staff, but I've rehired staff in other roles years later. I've had one friend, but before we were friends, she worked for me, and then I worked for her, and then she worked for me, and then I worked for her, and now we're just friends. But we've hired each other back and forth because we love working together. We have very different leadership styles, but we both excel at what we do. So it's fun to team up with her because she's just she gets it in a way that's different than me, and we play well off of each other. So yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, when you can find people like that at work, that it really makes everything better.
Absolutely. And I get really, I don't know, as someone who, again, back to the no kids thing, which I celebrate, I'm not challenged with that, but I do find that I take employees under my wing, and I become quite protective of them as well. So as I think a leader should, right? Like I think maybe further down in our conversation, but we're there to advocate for our team and our team members individually. So working in a restaurant and servers and bartenders and staff get verbally abused by customers all the time. And you have to be prepared to stand up for your staff and believe your staff. You really have to. And it's amazing how far that goes, and how that story will get passed along. There's been a couple of times where I've thrown guests out because they swore one time at a customer and they're halfway through their meal. And I said, you know what, your meal's taken care of, get out. We don't tolerate it. And it's great because, whatever, that's $100 that isn't paid for, but the value of the staff knowing that they're safe and their safety is entrusted with you, it's worth more than $100 check. So yeah. So I think that's, yes.
I've talked about that as the manager protecting the staff from upper management and some of their, craziness or things that they're trying to do too fast or too hard. But the other ways, I hadn't really thought about that, is having to protect them from the customer sometimes, which is probably, especially in hospitality, is probably a lot more common.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely comes from both ways in hospitality, and I've worked in some cases with owner where the space is beautiful space, and the experience for guests is fantastic overall, but then you have an owner or a founder who's just rages about something and is so particular about one thing that nobody can meet those standards, and protecting your staff from that experience as well is really important. So
Right.
yeah, I get it, but from customers you have to be a little more. Servers won't always, staff, front of house staff won't always tell you. So again, you kind of have to have eyes everywhere, and know that you need to step in. If you need to step in, you got to do that. So yeah, I think I got off track though with something. We were talking about something else.
That's okay. All podcasts are just tangents connected in some loose fashion.
Yes, true. And I'm really good with the tangents.
So what's something you learned from the best manager you ever worked for?
I think I said it already, but also just be willing and able to step up and do the role of your team. Create a trusting environment. When and if you can, create a fun environment. That very first restaurant I worked at, if people were getting really stressed out, the owners were, kind of like these two uptight brothers in a lot of ways. But then if we were really stressed or kind of like needing to decompress, I remember one of them used to take an empty laundry bag, because we've got linens everywhere, so there's laundry bags everywhere, and he would take an empty laundry bag and make a potato sack out of it and just make us do jumping races with him in the back of house, not in front of guests. But like, how much fun is that when you know that there's a stressful situation going on? I remember, I don't even know if this is the same day, but I remember we had a wedding where the groom accidentally spilt wine on the bride's dress, and she lost it on him in front of all of their guests and stormed off and wouldn't come out of the bathroom. Like, lost it. And how do you rectify that? Like, it's not our job, but like just a hot mess. And, there's all this tizzy and stuff going on. And I remember him, like, I don't know if I don't think he started a food fight, because we would never have done something like that. But, I remember him doing something like jumping in a linen bag or something, or just being like, this isn't your problem to fix. Loosen up. It's okay. And that redirecting of focus, I am someone who used to get very focused on a problem and my stress and not be able to get out of it. And I think as a leader, being able to figure out what's going to decompress your staff fast and effectively is really important.
Yeah. I think I used to work for a restaurant, which is probably the place I learned the most. And you came to visit me, and Sabrina came to visit me there, was a career-focused restaurant. And we had staff events that were off the hook. The management team worked really hard to create these collaborative, challenging, team-focused staff parties where it was team building but fun. Like, you were always, we'd have scavenger hunts or mini Olympics and things like that. They weren't actually physical activities. You didn't have to be an Olympian to compete in them, but and they just created these amazing memories that we still talk about to this day. That group of people in a lot of ways are still parts of my family. And I worked there more than a decade ago. So I think creating those fun times and environments, and it's how I learned to find triggers to decompress myself when I was really stressed out, because I would get really worked up about timeframes. I would get really stressed during busy rushes, or if we were short-staffed, or for any number of things. And one of my co-managers, she was the one who was tasked. We all had kind of like a team buddy, so it was like if that you needed to be aware of during your shift. And so as a manager, if she saw that I was like kind of getting really focused and stressed out, she'd just walk up and like tweak my nose or walk up and whisper something completely ridiculous in my ear to make me stop and realize it's just burgers, it's just burgers and fries. It's not rocket science. We're not brain surgeons. Like nobody's dying in this moment. Take a breath. And I think in truly pretty much every case outside of, surgery and rocket science, you don't really, there's always the opportunity to take a breath and take a pause. So I think those are the key things I learned from my best experiences with managers, for sure.
Right.
And being able to hop in when needed. So, So, yeah.
So on the flip side, what's the one thing you learned from the worst manager you ever had?
Yeah. This one I'm going to read because I like what I wrote, and I want to make sure I get it right. I feel that everyone, regardless of experience or position, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. If you're upset by a situation as a leader, it's your job to take a beat and analyze your feelings and identify what's ego and what's crucial to be addressed, and then approach the situation with patience and like a full 360 view on what's going on. As I've mentioned, managers are human beings too, and humans sit in a lot of ego a lot of the time. So a manager can get triggered by something or offended by something, or just have their teeth set on edge by something that the employee may not know does that, or they're just a shitty leader, who doesn't take that pause. So before you react to something one of your team members has done, or a situation that has been created, or whatever it is, some negativity, before you react to that, walk away from the situation and take a pause, whether that's 30 seconds, whether that's 30 minutes, whether it's a month, depending on the urgency of the situation. Take that beat, look at it, take it to a fellow team member if you need to, just so that you can take that ego out of it and see what's necessary in that situation to be resolved. And what about it is minutia. I think that's because I've had been reacted on by too many bosses about things that I was oblivious to having created or done, or any of those things. So yeah.
That there's also a through line with all the conversations for this topic too. So we can see some lessons learned from past managers.
Yeah.
So our last question, this one comes from our first guest, Ben Wilson, and his typical question for an interview is, that he ends the questions with is there a question that you've been wanting me to ask you, or something that you want everybody to know?
Yeah, that's great. I try to end a lot of interviews with that as well, because again, if you're on a time frame or you're trying to keep an interview to a certain period of time, it's really easy to miss that your candidate might have something they want to say, or I think a lot of what we've talked about, we've covered. I did say this already, but that entrepreneurship and leadership are not necessarily the same thing. I do feel that the traditional corporate system as it stands has not been built for employee or cultural or culture success, right? And it's really been built for profitability. And the more that we acknowledge that, the more that we can ask the right questions and find success for everyone, rather than only the C-suite title holders, right? Because a lot of times it's just profits, and revenue and all of that, and it really doesn't come down to, but who are the people creating that profit, and like I said, I'd love to see that ship being sunk entirely and rebuilt, but we are where we are, and and it's scary times in a lot of the world when it comes to. Sorry,
we need a bullet train. No more ships.
Yeah, we need a bullet train, but a well built, well thought out, efficient and happy bullet train, and advocate for your team. So I think those are, we did kind of parlay that into our conversation already, and believe them. You're creating safety if you believe them, and you talk to them about their perspective. Again, we get stuck in ego. So you believing them doesn't necessarily make what they're saying fact, but you believing them and listening to their thoughts and feelings, you don't have to become their therapist. You do need to help guide them, and uplift them and solve problems where you can. There's some problems you can't, solve, but I struggled for years with anxiety, and I remember having a young staff member in my office having a panic attack and getting her to lay on the floor and talking her through what that looked like. And I don't think, if I hadn't experienced that, if I didn't know what that was for me, I couldn't have helped her, and so I could have just shut it down. I was very busy that day. I did not have the time for her panic attack, but we're in the place that we're in. And at the end of the day, it's gone very far. We have, again, this is almost a decade ago, and she's doing incredibly well. Her career's gone off, and the years that we worked together as well, I saw her grow and mature in a way that she may not have under different leadership, and that's not necessarily just me. We collaborated as a team, and, and that culture that we were able to build is what helped foster at least one person's amazing career. That's what I would say. Listen and believe your team, and be there for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the first point you made, that entrepreneurship and leadership are different. The two industries that may suffer from that the most are hospitality and software.
Yeah.
You get the executive chef or the restaurateur who has the idea, but their capabilities outside of that idea, they're often the same one that's the computer software guy who figured out the coding problem to fix the issue that they're making a product for, but they can't manage their way out of a paper bag. So it's
and people, when you come up with an idea and you bring that idea to fruition, it's a piece of you, right? And people will attach to that in a way, and it's very natural for people to attach to their creation, and really feel like they need to hold on to it and control it. But the thing is the most way for that to be successful is to let it go, and to let it grow into what you've planted a seed, and you've created the seed, but you don't necessarily know where it's going to go, and you can't control that. You truly cannot control that. And so finding the right people to put in place to help foster that growth, your fellow gardeners, if you will, and understanding that you can't be the one fully in control of all the things it's the smartest move you can make. Totally and probably the most challenging part of my job consulting is to have that conversation with the people that hire me.
Getting the idea person to let go.
Yeah, exactly.
I know this is your idea or your product, but you've got to let it go and let somebody who knows what they're doing manage it, so it doesn't crash and burn. Exactly.
Yeah. And so it's why we do a lot of conversations about what the mountaintop looks like, and how we get to the mountaintop, and eventually successful clients get there. So
that's great.
So that's what I think.
Yeah. Cher, this was fantastic. I hope everybody enjoys it as much as I did, and you will definitely be a return visitor on the Managing Humans podcast. So
thank you. Well, I'm full of opinions.
That's almost all of my friends are. That's why we're friends. So, and they were valuable and insightful, and it's amazing how aligned hospitality is with other industries, but just different enough so that it kind of makes you see things a little bit differently. So hugely valuable to me, more. I know, and hopefully to everybody else.
Yeah. I think it's a great industry to have some experience in, because hiring people, what I would encourage to anyone who's looking at a resume, if somebody has food and beverage or retail experience on their resume at all, give them an interview and ask them what that experience was like, because very quickly you're going to find out their character and the skills that they developed from that, because you really learn a lot when you have to deal with people in very fast-paced, quick environments, right? And
Exactly.
sure, you get regulars, as you so fabulously were, but you also have people that come and go, and you still want to create that experience, that memorable experience for everyone. So it's a lot of behavioral sciences to get back to that, to get back to the science of people and the study of behavior. It's a skill that's very valuable in the rest of the world. So yeah,
you've given us lots to think about, and probably even more topics for other shows. So thank you so much.
Well, I'll look forward to scheduling that management or the interview, giving a successful interview class.
Yeah, I would love that. It's one of the things that I hear from a lot of people when they're first starting in management, that they're one of the hardest things that they have to do is sit down for their first interview. And especially at bigger companies, you get a lot of like job question banks, and it's very formulaic. But when you're running a coffee stand and you're trying to hire somebody, and it's like, you ever made coffee before? End of questions.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think even with the formulaic stuff, unless you were required to ask verbatim the questions that you're given, there's always room to make it more interesting, and to make it more engaging, and to truly glean a person's personality and fit for a role. So, yeah. Awesome.